we are talking The Red Book Ritual. Now this is a 2022 anthology movie primarily made from Argentina, although it is spoken in English. And it's a wraparound story with 5 individual stories within the main one. Now, I'll go through kind of the stories individually, but let me just kind of give you a brief overview of this Red Book Ritual. It is actually supposed to be some genuine kind of supernatural thing that you can do. There's actually a bunch of YouTube videos of apparently YouTubers doing this on camera and stuff, so you can go check that out if you want. But yeah, so apparently this is some real kind of, you know, quote unquote real urban legend. And our story takes place in this kind of old house where this young girl has kind of moved in there, and she's got 2 friends round and they're doing this Red Book Ritual. And essentially it's, you have to find a book that has a red cover with no illustrations, and you do this particular kind of ritual and you can kind of communicate with spirits and things. And so we have these kind of 3 friends that are doing this. Inevitably, as you can probably guess, it kind of, things start to happen. I'll come back to the kind of the main story at the end, but let me just go through the kind of the 5 individual anthologies. But to give you a brief overview, I thought the first two anthology sections were good. I think the second 2 were a little bit below average, and the third one was kind of average for me. But again, go into a little bit more detail. The first story of the anthology is about this guy who comes back from a war. Looks like it's possibly maybe, I don't know, the end of the First World War, perhaps, maybe the Second World War. It's hard to tell. Comes back to this kind of rural kind of farmhouse, and he sees his wife, who he seems to be a little bit strange, a little bit kind of like off-kilter, you might say. And actual fact, she's downright terrifying, because she is just seems to be completely away with the fairies, not responsive at all to the husband coming back from the war. All she's interested in is her cat, who she doesn't even know that there was a cat, you know, they had a cat, for example, and she's just like walking around naked with kind of blood coming down out of her mouth and kind of chattering. And suffice to say, there's something amiss here, and what'll happen is downright terrifying. This is, I think, probably the strongest out of all of the movies, because even though the story is relatively slight, and I feel it, and as with a lot of these films, to be honest with you, a lot of these kind of segments, it kind of ends on a little bit of an unsatisfying note, because it kind of feels like you don't get the whole, it stops before it kind of really properly concludes. The performances from our 2 actors are so good, it really sells you on the terror here. The woman who is playing this kind of like the wife, they've cast her so well. She's this skinny woman who's just kind of like walking around naked in the days with all this kind of like blood and stuff, and she's just kind of chattering and acting like really bizarre. And although it's nothing overtly kind of like special effects heavy, it's so disturbing, it genuinely will creep you out. The guy's reaction to it as well, I think, is also kind of excellent, because he just doesn't know what to do. And you know, he thinks it might be something to do with this particular kind of cat, but it's pretty damn disturbing, this one. And I gotta say, I thought it was an excellent example of visual storytelling. There's not a huge amount of dialogue, but it's so well shot, so well acted, and really is so unsettling, because I think of the good concept and the way it's performed here. So that one I thought was by far and away the kind of the best one. But I also really like the second one as well, although this one has a little bit of it kind of cuts off, I think, but a little bit too soon. And this involves this couple that are driving home after the woman has lost a baby. Along the way, they're going to spot this kid on the side of the road who just seems to be in some sort of distress, but they're warned off by this old man. Now, the story with this one is not much more than that, to be honest. It doesn't get much more story than that. There's obviously a little bit more than what I've just said, but it's very, this is the shortest and kind of in a way the most unsatisfying, but it still has a good level of fear and kind of trepidation while you're watching it. This one kind of gives you it's fairly obvious about what's going to happen, but nonetheless, it's still kind of well shot. The way this kid is kind of like hunched over with his head down. Again, it looks genuinely kind of creepy and unsettling. And again, it's subtlety in storytelling here. You kind of get the idea about what happens, and you know, it's kind of quite shocking. But then it just ends. I thought this one ends, and it's done deliberately, but it ends, I think, in an unsatisfying manner that you think you kind of, oh, I kind of wanted to see where that was going, but it's just kind of ended before that. Blue balls. There you go. Those who I thoroughly enjoyed. The third one is actually an Asian kind of segment, and it reminds me a little bit of movies like Audition. And we have this young girl and her mother who seem initially to be quite kind of like happy-go-lucky, but then we find out the father is actually kind of tied up in the bedroom with his kind of eyes propped open, with this kind of like, so he can't kind of blink and things like that, and he's being seemingly tortured by the mother. And this one's not for the squeamish, I would say. There's certainly a little bit of an eye-watering scene, is all I'll say. This one's dubbed quite badly. I mean, I think all the others are kind of spoken in English by the actors. This one is clearly dubbed, but so it gives it a little bit of an unnatural feel. But I just didn't think there was much to it. I mean, it just kind of seemed kind of pointless, if I'm honest. And I was kind of, after watching that sort of segment, I thought, so what was that about then? You know, it kind of didn't really. Why? What was the point? So that one, to me, although it was sort of well shot, and I do think there is some, as I say, imagery that will certainly make you feel uncomfortable, it kind of seemed pointless. So that, to me, was kind of a little bit of a disappointing one in some ways. And then the fourth one, we have this female doctor who is trying to look after her brother, who seems to be on kind of life support. And there's some particular drug that he needs that they've run out of, that is the only chance that he's got. And this doctor goes into this other wing of the hospital where there may be some drug. And when she's there, it seems to be somewhat abandoned, but there seems to be like this kind of patient that seems like somehow threatening. And there's a good jump scare in this one, with some decent kind of like makeup effects. But the issue I have with this one is that I don't understand why the doctor is so freaked out when she's just seeing this kind of like this guy who's got these injuries walking around. The only reason we as an audience are scared of or would feel fear for this is because of the real like heavy duty horror music that's kind of playing over it. But if you watch this section, I would say take the horror music away. And why is a doctor freaking out about a patient kind of walking around who's got some injuries? It doesn't make sense. It just doesn't make any sense to me. There's no reason until we kind of get to this kind of like, there's a little bit of overt horror right at the end of the actual section. But until that point, there's no reason why she's kind of freaking out. It just doesn't make any sense to me. And again, this movie just seemed like it was kind of a little pointless. I mean, it's kind of essentially a crisis of conscience, I suppose. That's the theme of this movie. But the actual just logical sense to me just didn't work. I didn't understand why this woman was meant to be so scared of things, especially since she's meant to be a doctor. You'd think you'd see people walking around with injuries all the time. Doesn't make sense. The fifth one is this one I think has the at least I would say the most complete arc in the movie. In out of all the kind of the 5 little segments here, a lot of them I feel just didn't have a complete story. This one I would say at least does, and it's about this kind of this religious community, and there's a young girl who's the daughter of the local kind of preacher, and he's very orthodox, shall we say, and they're kind of like praying the gay away and things, and she's actually having a kind of an affair with this other older woman, and people kind of get wind of it and things happen. And this is kind of like, actually has somewhat of a bittersweet conclusion. But as with all of these films to a certain degree, I just felt it was lacking a little bit of meat on the bones. Again, it seems so slight story-wise, and that is true, I would say, of all of these films, all of these like little segments. And I guess that maybe that's the sort of the downside of having an anthology, because obviously you're on short on time, but they just seem like little snippets rather than a kind of a story. But I mean, I've watched anthology films where I do feel that segments can tell a kind of a complete story, whilst this one you just get, you know, it feels like you're just getting like parts of stories, apart from maybe the end one, which I say, although it's kind of not all that interesting. It's fine. I mean, I would say the first two are pretty good. The second two, to me, I felt were a little lacking, and the fifth, the final kind of anthology section was fine. It was just fine. There was not a lot to it. But that's kind of the thing with this film, I would say. Now we have to talk about the actual wraparound story itself, which, you know, if you're looking at kind of minutes on screen, this gets the most kind of screen time when you kind of add up all the sections in between the anthology segments. Again, I would say here, one of the key things for this film, this is true of all of them, they all look great. This is a film where every section in this film looks great. The kind of the set design, the cinematography, the production value, they all look very kind of polished and, you know, with sort of a decent particular production value here. And this story as a whole is fairly predictable. The kind of the actual kind of Red Book ritual kind of story itself is fairly predictable. You kind of know where it's going to go, and it does kind of, I would say, borrow quite heavily from a particular kind of horror franchise, particularly kind of the end shot of the film. But it's not without its good points, because I would say there's a scene here that is a particularly gross out scene. It will make you feel very uncomfortable and is somewhat kind of gross in many ways. And the special effects on this one, the actual makeup of a particular character, I think is pretty strong. But I would say that the main downside with the overreaching story bit is the acting is quite poor. We have these three cast members, these two girls and this guy. And I think this being an Argentinian film, they're from that region, but they're speaking English. But the acting is pretty weak, I have to say, from all three of them. In their line delivery, their kind of the physical acting, it is a little weak on the weak side, unfortunately. And like I said, it's a little bit predictable, that kind of that particular arc. And again, it's probably the part of the kind of the constrictions from having, you know, short form kind of storytelling in regards to, realistically, only amount of minutes really for these kind of stories to kind of have their piece. Overall, though, all the films have a good production value. I would say this movie is managed as a whole is a very good visual storytelling, from excellent to at least kind of like, yeah, not terrible, but you know, all of them have good visuals. They're kind of well shot. Maybe they're not all that interesting, and I do feel maybe all of the stories to a degree have a little bit of an unsatisfying feel, because you feel that because of the short running time of them all, you kind of feel they're a little bit truncated. But I do have to say, the strength of the visuals is that where I would say this is probably an above average movie. And the first one, to me at least, is so strong, it definitely kind of rises the anthology as a whole to certainly an above average anthology horror for me. And as such, I'll give this one a 6 out of 10. Have you seen it? Will you see it? Let me know what you think, and I'll look forward to seeing you next time. Bye for now.